Do you have a partner that you wish was into Trek? If so, then stick around. Hey Trekkies, welcome back to another episode of Yelling About Star Trek. My name is Christian Fox, and this is the show where I yell at you about all things Star Trek for your amusement. Today, I want to try and solve a problem that a lot of us Trekkies have experienced or might even be experiencing right now. So for the sake of argument, let's just say that you have found the perfect person. This person is your dream person. In fact, they're so much your dream partner that they are actually the end game, the thing that you have been waiting for your whole life, and now they're finally here. There's just one problem. They don't like Star Trek. In fact, they're not even really sure what Star Trek is about beyond the fact that it's just a bunch of people in goofy uniforms saying things that might not make sense to the average person. And with all of that, you really want to get them into it because, well, they mean so much to you and Star Trek means so much to you. And it would be great if both of those things could come together and you could really share that with them, if that makes any sense. So today, I want to show you how you can potentially get your partner into Star Trek. And I say potentially because I don't want to make any guarantees. Obviously, I can't guarantee 100% that this thing will work. And if I did, and you tried it, and it didn't work, you would probably come back to me and say, "Hey, Chris, what are you doing? I tried all this stuff, and it didn't work. What's going on?" And I don't know why I'm doing this faux New York, Brooklyn accent or whatever it is, but it's always what I do when I imitate people yelling at someone else about a problem or an issue. I always divert to that accent, so I apologize. I don't know I'm going on about this for so long, but you get my point. I don't want to make a promise and then have it not work for you and then have you be upset with me because also it's very awkward. But these things are just not a fine science, so I'm going to say potentially. And with that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about how to get your partner into Star Trek. So when thinking about this, there are really two elements you want to think about. You want to think about the how and the what. So the how is, what method are you going to actually use to expose them to Star Trek? Now, as I see it, there's actually two different things you can choose from. One is the bold and upfront and honest, "Hey, I want to get you into Star Trek. Would you please sit down with me and watch this episode?" And you can try that. It might work. People say honesty is the best policy, and I think, yeah, being honest is always great. The challenge, however, is that by saying that, they might go, "Okay, sure, I'll do it," but it's probably more of a, "All right, I'll get it over with. I'll do the routine. I'll put on a show and try to be interested, but really I don't want to do it and I don't really care." So you're kind of forcing them into a situation they don't want to be in, and it might be harder for them to get into it because there's all this pressure of you saying, "Hey, can you sit down and watch it?" I know personally that when someone says, "Hey, you got to watch this show or this movie, hey, watch it with me," I feel there's a bit of pressure for me to, as I said, put on this performance to show that, wow, I'm really into it. And I know that the person that suggested that I watch this and is watching it with me is watching me watch that program. So it's always a little bit awkward. And because of that, I would not recommend this method. Again, it's up to you, but I wouldn't recommend this. The other option, the one that I would recommend, is a more stealth approach. And that's simply finding a time when you're both in the living room or wherever your TV is, and you're both doing something different but not actively watching something. Maybe your partner's on their laptop because they want to get work done for the next week that's coming up, or maybe they're chatting with someone on Facebook or whatever the heck people do when they're not watching TV. And so you can find that moment and say, "Hey, do you mind if I throw in an episode of Star Trek?" And they might go, "Okay, yeah, that's no problem." And what's great about this method is, unlike the first one, they don't feel any pressure to engage because, again, you're watching the show, they're not. They just happen to be there while you're watching them. While this is happening, there's always the chance that they might poke their head up and go, "Oh, this is interesting. Wait, what's going on? What's happening there?" And that actually happened to me once where I was watching it in my grandparents' house. I was watching the episode Court Martial, the one where Captain Kirk is accused of murdering one of his officers and there's a whole trial. And I remember watching this in my living room, or rather my grandparents' living room. Felt like mine because I always got to choose what we were watching, which, my grandpa put up with, which was nice of him. But anyways, she was, reading the paper, doing her thing. And then she was kind of listening to the episode and was interested and then started asking me questions. And it was one of the very few times that my grandmother was actually into Star Trek, because usually I would put on the show and she would just ignore it because, well, it's weird in Star Trek. But she got into it. So that was a huge moment for me where I was like, okay, cool. This is a big deal. My grandma's watching Trek with me. So the same thing can probably happen to you if you use that method, which is the more, as I said, stealth approach, as opposed to saying, hey, can you sit down and watch Star Trek with me? Now that you have a method down, the next thing you want to think about is the what. What episode are you going to show them? Now, there are actually two options. The first option is to find an episode that's easily accessible, one that doesn't take a lot of background knowledge of Star Trek to get into, where you can kind of just jump in, see an episode, and be like, all right, that was interesting, but I don't need to know the full backstory of what happened to Worf when he was disowned and stripped of all of his honor, but then got his honor back and then lost his honor again. You don't need to know all that background. You just need to know that, okay, this is this character and this is kind of interesting. I would say Data episodes are fantastic for that. They're really easy to understand and they're kind of relatable, because there's something about Data that just makes him so relatable when he's questioning what it means to be human and why is something funny and what does small talk mean. So a Data episode, always a good place to start, but there are tons of episodes that are really easy to pick up and digest and to get a newcomer into. The second option is to find an episode that relates to your partner's interest. The beauty of Star Trek is that while it's all sci-fi, it actually does cover most genres. For example, if your partner's really into legal dramas, then you can show them the aforementioned Court Martial or show them Measure of a Man. And Measure is such a great episode for newcomers because it's easy to understand. It features Data, who is probably the most likable character in Star Trek, I would say. That could be debated, but he is a character, as I said earlier, that people just connect with, and that I feel like even non-fans can understand who Data is and kind of connect with him on the level of, hey, he's kind of interesting, and it's interesting to see someone asking what it means to be human. So there's the Data appeal. And it also really shows you exactly what Star Trek is about, where I would even make the argument that if you were to sit down with no context and watch Measure of a Man, then you would get the idea of exactly what Star Trek was about and its fundamental principles. So I think that's a great option if, of course, they're into legal dramas. And if your partner's more into police procedural, something like Criminal Minds or NCIS, then you might want to show them Darkness and the Light. And that is a fantastic episode because it has all of the classic police procedural elements of like, okay, there's a crime and these people have been murdered. Who's doing it? You have the investigator. So you have all of that great stuff. It's a little bit more grotesque. So you do have the intensity of a Criminal Minds episode, but it's also really easy to understand because it doesn't completely rely on every single piece of established canon. Yes, it helps to know who Odo is, and yes, it helps if you understand Kira's backstory, and it helps to know about the occupation, but a lot of that information is delivered in the dialogue. So even if you haven't seen every single episode of DS9, you can kind of understand what the occupation is, who Kira is, and who all the main characters are. So I think that's a great episode if you want to show them a police procedural, Criminal Minds, NCIS kind of show. Or maybe your partner's really into romance and likes rom-coms. Then you might want to show them His Way. And His Way, of course, is the episode where Odo teams up with Vic Fontaine to win over Kira. I love the episode. I think it's very charming. It's very romantic, of course. It's funny. So it has all of the great rom-com elements. But the main point I'm making is that all you need to do is think about what genre of film or television your partner likes, and then find an episode of Star Trek that relates to that, because there are so many choices to choose from. So if you try these methods, you just might get your partner into Star Trek. But what do you think? Do you think this method might work? Are you going to try this out in your own life? Or do you think what I'm saying is just as crazy as saying that you can't travel warp 10 because you might turn into a salamander? Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And if you like this video, hit that like button and hit that subscribe button, because it helps me out and obviously it helps you so you don't miss any of my future videos. And in the paraphrased words of Captain Kirk, I shall see you out there. That away.